How can I... What they did to me.
Where are you?
I'm sorry I dialed the wrong number.
Her badge was on the sidewalk. She hadn't thrown it. She hadn't even meant to drop it. It had just slipped from her fingers somewhere between the revolving door and the rain. And now, it was face up on the wet concrete with her photo staring back at her. That stupid photo where she'd smiled too wide because the HR woman had said smile right as the camera clicked. And Petra had been too eager. The way she was always too eager, and now here it was. Her face on the ground. In the rain, she didn't pick it up. Inside that building, on the 14th floor, her supervisor Kevin was probably already in the conference room. Probably already accepting the handshakes. Probably already saying thank you over the contract restructure that had taken Petra 6 months of 12-hour days and 2 canceled trips. Home to Ohio to finish. Kevin, who had asked to review her draft 3 weeks ago. Kevin, who had submitted it under his own name to a client. Petra had never been allowed to meet. She'd found out the way you find out about things that were never meant to reach you through an accidental CC on an email chain, 4 names deep. Sent to the wrong Petra in the company directory by the time she'd made it to HR. Her access badge had already been deactivated. They hadn't even let her go back to her desk. She stood on the sidewalk in the rain and pulled out her phone and called her sister. Amy picked up on the second ring, except it wasn't Amy. The voice that answered was low and unhurried, and it said, "Yes, it's not hello. Not who is this? Just yes." Petra pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at the screen. The name said Amy. She'd hit the wrong contact, the one just above it. A number she'd saved 3 weeks ago from a voicemail. She'd never returned something about a building inspection at the firm. Some administrative call she'd forwarded to the wrong person and meant to delete from her phone. She hadn't. She almost hung up. She didn't. I'm sorry, she said. I dialed the wrong. I'm sorry, I'm having a situation. What kind of situation? Nice. The way he said it, flat and immediate. Like he was already deciding whether the situation was worth the next 60 seconds of his time. She pressed her hand to her forehead. The rain was getting into her collar. My supervisor stole 6 months of my work and submitted it as his own. And when I tried to report it, HR had already been told I was a performance issue and deactivated my badge, and I'm standing outside in the rain, and I called the wrong number. I'm so sorry. I'll let you go. I'll pause. Firm, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry? The firm. What's the name of it? She told him. She didn't know why. Maybe because his voice made it feel like not answering would take more energy than answering. He asked one more question, the name of the client the work had been submitted to, and she answered that too. And it was only after she'd said it that she realized she'd given a stranger on the phone more information in 3 minutes than she'd given the HR woman in 20. Day. Where you are, he said. Excuse me? There's a coffee shop across the street. Go inside. I'll be there in 32 minutes. I don't. Who are you? Why would I? Because you called me, he said, and I picked up. He ended the call. She went inside the coffee shop. She told herself it was because of the rain. She ordered a coffee. She didn't drink and sat in a window booth and watched the street and thought about leaving every 4 minutes for the next half hour. She had her phone in her hand the whole time. She didn't call Amy. She didn't know what she would have said. He walked in at exactly 32 minutes. No umbrella. Dark coat, no tie. The kind of unhurried walk that came not from arrogance but from having made enough decisions in enough rooms that movement itself had become deliberate. He scanned the coffee shop once and found her immediately and came to the booth and sat down across from her. Like they had a standing appointment. She had expected someone older. He wasn't old. He was just certain. In the way that some people are certain of gravity. You thought about leaving, he said. I'm still thinking about it, she said. He looked at her for a moment, then turned and got the attention of the server without raising his voice. Just the slight angle of his head and ordered 2 coffees. She started to say she already had one. He glanced at the untouched cup in front of her. She didn't finish the sentence. When the server left, He set his phone face down on the table and looked at her. "Tell me what happened. Start from the contract, not from today." So she told him. She didn't mean to tell him all of it. She'd meant to give him the abbreviated version, the sensible version. The version where she didn't sound like someone who'd spent 4 years being systematically overlooked and had simply not noticed until it became impossible to miss. But he asked a question after the first 2 minutes. Something precise about the documentation structure. And the question told her he already understood more than she'd explained, so she stopped filtering. She told him the whole thing. He didn't interrupt again. He just listened. And the quality of his listening was specific. Not passive, not polite. But the kind of listening that was actually tracking, building, filing each piece into something she couldn't see yet. She was halfway through explaining the contract, clause restructure, when she laughed. Wrong moment. She knew it the second it came out, that nervous, self-aware laugh that happened when things were too much and her body had to do something with it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't actually think it's funny. I know," he said. Not harshly, just clearly, and she didn't know why, but that made her breathe out. He pushed the second coffee toward her. She wrapped her hands around it. When she finished, he said, "You didn't know who the client was." Kevin handled all the external communication. "I only ever the client is being audited," he said. "By my company. We flagged irregularities in the contract documentation 2 months ago. The language in those clauses didn't match the firm's standard output. It was more precise." He looked at her. "Now I know why." Petra set the coffee down. Her hands were very steady, which surprised her, because everything underneath them was not. "That's your company is the one auditing, yes." She sat back. "So when I called you, I already knew something was wrong with the documentation. I didn't know the source." He paused. "You were the loose end they needed to remove before the audit progressed." It sat in the air between them. She let it. The thing about being told you were betrayed on purpose with intention, with planning, was that it didn't make it hurt more. It just rearranged the hurt into something heavier and more structural. She'd spent 2 hours thinking she'd been unlucky. She hadn't been unlucky. She looked down at her phone on the table. The Toto list she'd opened on autopilot in HR was still on the screen. Return library books, call landlord. Pick up dry cleaning tasks she'd typed while waiting for the HR woman to finish her script about performance issues. Because her hands needed something to do and the list was the only thing that felt manageable, he was watching her. She didn't know how long he'd been watching her. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Want my name back," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way true things sometimes did. Before the careful version could catch up, he didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I'm putting together the documentation trail for the audit. I need someone who understands what the original work was supposed to do. Why each clause was written the way it was written. That's not something my legal team can reconstruct without the person who built it." He said it plainly, the way he said everything. "I'm offering you a contract. Temporary. Consulting rate." She stared at him. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you the mechanism to get your name attached to the work before this audit closes. What you do after that is up to you." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "I need an answer by tomorrow morning," he said. He reached into his coat and placed a card on the table, not handed to her. Placed the way you'd set something down that you weren't worried about, and stood up. 8 o'clock. She picked up the card. His name, a phone number. That was all. "You didn't tell me your name," she said. "On the call, you didn't ask," he said. And he left. She looked him up before he'd reached the door. The search results were thin. A man who'd either never courted attention or had spent money ensuring he didn't have to. One legal journal, 3 years old, had a single reference in a profile about corporate restructuring. One quote. His name in a footnote attached to an acquisition. The firm being acquired in that footnote was the parent company of the firm. She'd walked out of 2 hours ago. She looked up from her phone. Through the rain-blurred window, she could see his car still parked at the curb. Black, unmarked driver in the front. He wasn't in it yet. She could see him on the sidewalk, coat dark with rain, phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was standing there in the way that powerful people sometimes stood in public, taking up exactly the amount of space they required and not apologizing for it. He didn't leave for 4 more minutes. She watched him not leave her to-do list was still open on her screen. Without thinking about it, she typed one more line at the bottom. 8 a.m. Answer.
She showed up at 8. She told herself it was pragmatic. She told herself this on the elevator ride up, and in the lobby while the front desk assistant checked her name against the list. Her name already on a list, which meant he'd called ahead, which meant at some point last night he'd been certain she would come even when she hadn't been, and she told herself it again when she was shown to a glass-walled workspace on the 15th floor with a desk, a monitor, and a keycard already waiting. Not a cubicle tucked somewhere apologetic. A real desk with a sight line to the main floor, positioned like it belonged there. She set her bag down and looked at the keycard. Her name was printed on it. Not temp or visitor or consultant. Her name. First and last. She didn't know why that made her throat tighten. She should have been past the point where small dignities hit her that hard. Apparently she wasn't. Cole didn't greet her. She didn't see him until the 3rd hour of the morning, when he appeared at the glass wall of her workspace, knocked once without waiting for a response, and set a physical folder on the corner of her desk. He'd marked one page with a single post, no note, just a yellow tab, and walked out before she could say anything. She opened to the marked page. It was a contract clause from the audit file. His annotation was in the margin, 3 words in clean narrow handwriting. Why the structure? She stared at it for a moment. Then she pulled up her original draft, found the parallel clause, and started writing an explanation in the margin below his question. She filled half the page. She handed the folder to his assistant at noon. He returned it at 2:15 with a single line added below her explanation. That's what I thought. That was it. No further comment. She read it twice and couldn't decide if it was dismissive or the highest compliment she'd received in 4 years. By day 3 she decided it was the latter. The work was dense and absorbing in the way that good problems were absorbing, not comfortable but engaging enough that the hours moved. She was reconstructing the intent behind every clause in the original contract. Why this language, why this protection, what gap it was closing. It was, in the most factual sense, the most sophisticated thing she'd ever been asked to do. Not because it was beyond her. Because someone had finally asked. Cole appeared intermittently. Never announced, never hovering, just suddenly present, reading over her shoulder for 30 seconds, making a single correction to something on her screen, and leaving without explaining the correction. The first time it happened she was annoyed. The second time she was paying attention. By the 3rd time she'd started to understand that his corrections weren't changes, they were directions. He wasn't fixing her work. He was pointing toward where it needed to go. She figured out the reason for each correction within 20 minutes of him leaving every time. She didn't know if he knew she was doing that. She suspected he did. It was Friday of the first week when she heard him laugh. She hadn't been supposed to be at the working lunch, she'd been pulled in at the last minute when someone canceled, and she'd sat at the far end of the table with her folder and stayed quiet. Cole was at the head, going through acquisition logistics with 2 senior people, and halfway through the meeting his phone lit up on the table. He glanced at it. He let it go to voicemail. It lit up again immediately. He picked up. Bex. Pause. I'm in a meeting. Another pause, longer, and then, not a laugh exactly but the compression of one air through his nose, the expression of someone who found something genuinely funny and had no intention of performing that for an audience. He said, "That's not what I said and you know it," and ended the call. He looked up. The 2 senior people were looking at their folders. Petra was looking at her folder too, except she glanced up for 1/2 second and he'd caught her, and she looked back down immediately. When the meeting ended and she was gathering her things, she heard him behind her say without preamble, "My sister thinks she's funny." Petra looked up. He was closing a folder, not looking at her. "Is she?" Petra asked. He considered this with the gravity of someone weighing a legal argument. "Occasionally," he said, and walked out. She stood at the end of the conference table for a moment. She'd remember the sound of that almost laugh for no reason she could justify. Derek was a senior consultant who worked 2 floors down and had started appearing on 15 with increasing frequency and decreasing professional justification. The first time he'd asked Petra a question about the audit documents. Reasonable. The second time he'd leaned against her desk and asked where she'd gone to school, which was not about the audit documents at all. By Wednesday of week 2 he'd started stopping by at the end of the day. On Thursday Cole walked past her workspace at 6:15, clocked Derek mid-lean and kept walking. Petra thought that was the end of it. On Friday morning, Derek stopped by to tell her he'd just been reassigned to a project in Denver. Left Monday, 3-week engagement, sorry they'd catch up when he was back. He looked slightly bewildered about it. Petra said she hoped Denver went well. After he left, she sat for a moment and thought about the timeline. Cole had walked past Thursday evening. The reassignment had apparently been processed Thursday night. She looked toward the glass wall of the main floor. Cole was at his desk on a call, not looking at her. She looked back at her screen. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But the narration knew, and so did the audience, and that was enough. The documentation was nearly complete when Petra found the memo. It was buried in a subfolder of archived internal records, a 2-year-old flag from Cole's company's intake process, attached to the original audit watch list for the firm. Most of it was standard. One attachment wasn't. It was a single page. Her name at the top. Her original draft language, 2 paragraphs of it, pulled and preserved as an exhibit. A note below, source unknown, independent contractor or junior staff. Language quality inconsistent with firm's standard output. Flag for follow-up. At the bottom, initialed. It. She sat very still. She read the date. 2 years ago. He'd flagged her work 2 years ago. He'd known, not her name, not her face, but her work. It had already been noted. Already marked as something that didn't fit the environment around it. She took the memo to his office. His assistant started to say he was busy. Petra said, "I'll wait." She sat in the chair outside his door for 11 minutes. When he came out to take a document from the printer and saw her, he stopped. She held up the memo. His expression didn't change. That was almost its own answer. "Come in," he said. She sat across from his desk. She put the memo between them. He looked at it, then at her. "Before I called you," she said, "you already had my work." "I had a sample of language I couldn't source," he said. "I didn't have your name until you called me. But you would have found it. You were going to find it." He was quiet for a moment. The audit would have led there eventually, yes. So when I called, it accelerated a process that was already moving. He said it plainly. No apology, no softening. "I didn't manufacture the situation, Petra. I just recognized what you handed me." She looked at the memo. Then at him. "Would you have helped me? If I hadn't called? If I'd just been a name you found at the end of an audit trail?" He didn't answer immediately. His jaw shifted once. A small movement, the kind that happened when someone was deciding whether the honest answer would cost them something and deciding to say it anyway. "I don't know," he said. It was the most honest thing he could have said. She knew that. She sat with it. She presented the completed documentation restructure to his legal team on a Tuesday morning. 40 minutes, clean and precise, every decision sourced and defended. When the questions came, she answered them without checking her notes. The lead attorney looked at Cole at one point with an expression that said something Petra wasn't supposed to notice. Cole's expression said nothing. Afterward, he walked her to the elevator. She was running the debrief in her head, cataloging what had landed and what she'd rushed, and he stopped in the hallway and she almost walked past him. "Petra." She turned. "You built the argument they couldn't find in 6 months," he said. 11 days. "I want that on record, yours, not mine." She didn't know where to put that. It was too direct and too real, and it didn't have any of the softening language people usually wrapped around compliments to make them easier to receive. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. He looked at her for a beat that lasted slightly longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway. She stood there. The elevator opened. She got in. The doors closed. She breathed for 2 full floors. She fell asleep at her desk on a Wednesday. She hadn't meant to. She'd been there since 7 that morning. It was past 11 at night, and somewhere between the final review and the second cup of cold coffee the day just ended without her permission. She woke up when something settled over her shoulders. She didn't move. She wasn't fully awake. The weight was a jacket, not placed carelessly, placed with attention, and by the time she'd registered it, the footsteps had already moved away. She heard his office chair. The quiet of the floor settling back around her. She didn't turn around. She stayed still, eyes closed, jacket over her shoulders, listening to the sound of him not leaving. In the morning she folded the jacket over her arm and knocked on his open office door. He was on a call. He looked up. She held up the jacket and mouthed thank you. He nodded once and looked back at his desk. When the call ended, before she could leave, he said, "You don't have to keep thanking me for things, Petra." She stopped at the doorway. "It's starting to sound like you're surprised someone would." Pause. "You shouldn't be." She left without answering because she didn't have an answer that wouldn't give away too much, and she was standing in the elevator before she realized her hand was pressed flat against her sternum like something needed steadying. Her contract end date arrived on a Thursday. She packed the desk. It didn't take long. She kept it clean, kept it temporary in her head the way she kept everything temporary that she was afraid to need. She took her folder. She left the keycard. The lobby was bright and quiet. She had her bag on her shoulder and the elevator behind her and the front doors in front of her, and she told herself she was fine, she was practical, she knew what this was. He was standing at the front desk, not looking at his phone, not in a meeting, just standing there, coat on, like he'd taken the elevator down specifically to be in the lobby at this exact time. She stopped walking. "I pushed your contract end by 30 days, he said. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I'm telling you now." She looked at him. The lobby was empty except for the security desk, and the morning light was coming in flat through the front glass, and Cole Hartwell was standing there with his hands in his coat pockets looking at her like he was done pretending the next 30 days were about the documentation. "Cole," she said. "Stay," he said. Flat. Quiet. The word carried the weight of everything he hadn't said in 2 weeks of hallways and corrected margins and a jacket placed over her shoulders at 11 at night, and he didn't dress it up because a man like him didn't know how to ask for things softly, and she was starting to understand that was not a flaw. It was just how much it cost him. She stayed. 4 months later, she was at Bex's birthday dinner. Small apartment, loud music, the kind of easy noise Cole normally excused himself from within an hour. He hadn't moved. Bex had figured it out 2 months ago. She'd told Petra privately that she'd heard it in his voice on a Sunday call. Some change in the register she said she'd never heard before and had immediately interrogated him about. Cole had said, according to Bex, that it was complicated. Bex had said that it really wasn't. Petra was laughing at something Bex had just said. A story about Cole at 17, catastrophically wrong about something, delivered with the precise comedy of a sibling who had been waiting years to tell it in company. She felt him looking at her before she turned. He was watching her from across the table. Not analyzing. Not measuring. Just watching, the way you watched something you'd decided about and were done performing uncertainty around. His expression was open in a way she'd only seen in pieces before, in a corrected margin, in a hallway, in the weight of a jacket at 11 at night. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not dramatically. The way you did when the decision was already made and the reaching was just the last, honest confirmation of it. She looked at him. He looked back. He'd spent 15 years building rooms he could control. She'd walked in through a wrong number and he hadn't wanted to fix it. Not once. Not from the moment she'd laughed at the wrong time in a coffee shop while her badge was still on the wet sidewalk outside, and something in his chest had done something he hadn't felt in years. He'd hated that he noticed. Then he'd stopped hating it. That was the moment, not the call, not the lobby, not the jacket. This. Him choosing in the loudest room he'd been in years to be seen. Her hand in his. Both of them on the same side of it.